It was one of those early spring days where the winter had fought its way back in a relentless pursuit to stay in the limelight, even though it knew its days were numbered. Jas and Ether, the beasts of success. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. What makes beautiful writing beautiful? Karen, McKay, and Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access are here with their thoughts. Karen is the communications manager there, and Theresa is the access librarian. And guys, first of all, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to need your help here for this conversation because I'm talking to two people who work for a library about what makes writing beautiful. I've never had a college level literature class or creative writing class or anything like that. I got a C+ in my 12th grade English class. And so I feel like I'm a little bit out of my water here. Can you guys please help me with this? And I'm thinking the way we do this conversation is we kind of go in circles, in a circle, and one by one, just talk about what makes beautiful writing beautiful. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds great. Good.
Karen, you want to try and you want to have your first go at this?
Sure, I'll have a go. So Billy Collins, who's a poet, he was the poet laureate for the US, I can't remember when, but not too long ago. He's quoted as saying that the point of writing is to marry truth and beauty. And so for me, I think beautiful writing does a couple of things. It either offers a really unique metaphor for something that I've been thinking about, but it gives me a new way to look at it, or it makes me realize something I already know, but with a different perspective. And so those are the sorts of things that pull me up in a book. They pull me up short and make me want to write down whatever I've just read. For me, sometimes it can be the subject that's beautiful, but it's more often the language that's used that makes me think that this is beautiful writing.
Right, because there's a difference in like a beauty of ideas, just somebody who's coming from a fresh perspective, and the beauty of the writing itself. But to share those ideas, it helps a lot to be able to use the right words to do that, right? You know, people talk about hearing the right things at the right time. Using the right wording is the only way to do that. And that's what good writers do when they write beautifully, is they use the right words to describe the right things. And I think that's what you're describing here.
Yeah. And for me, it also has to have a rhythm. Beautiful writing has to have a rhythm to it.
A rhythm.
Yeah. Whether that's a really lyrical way to write, or something that's more, I'm kind of thinking of musical terms, more staccato, something that sort of like is like a bump, 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 like an insight after an insight after an insight. Those are things that I think are beautiful.
Yeah, I've heard that what authors tend to do is try to vary the lengths of their sentences. So have a long one, then a short one, then a long one, then a short one. And you can utilize like a bunch of long sentences in a row to give off this more dreamy, how would you say that? Like a flow of consciousness type of monologue, whereas if something is more intense and urgent and it's action, you do a bunch of small sentences.
Exactly.
And so you can utilize flow to your advantage. Theresa, you wanna give us your first point of what makes beautiful writing beautiful?
I mean, what a question. It's really sent me kind of honestly spiraling a little bit, because I think for me, a beautiful book can have can be like beautifully written. It could really touch upon that language piece, and I think that rhythm that Karen speaks about. And it can be well written, but not necessarily like tap into that rhythm as well. I think for me, and just looking at the examples and the things that I kind of gravitated towards when thinking about this and wanting to talk about this, is really books that make me think about the big questions, like, what is the purpose of life? What is the human condition? And books that really challenge my beliefs and my belief systems. And I really gravitate towards books, fancy writing or not, that really evoke strong feelings. And it could be like good feelings, it could be bad feelings, it could be uneasiness. And evokes very strong imagery as well. I really love books that transport me to places, and I maybe have never been there, but I'm like, wow, I can really like picture myself, you know, being there. Um, and these are all stories, again, with the examples that I brought forth to talk about today. These are all stories that I keep coming back to. You know, they're the ones that I can't stop thinking about. And for myself, whether people think of them as classics or not, I think are classics for myself. So stories that I just can never like put away, um, personally. So that's what I think beautiful books are to me.
I'd love to hear some examples. Did you guys come with excerpts by any chance?
We did, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karen, do you want to share one of them and like maybe like what it's like the context of it and how it exemplifies beautiful writing?
Sure. So my first selection is from The Phantom Tollbooth, which is a children's fantasy book that was published in the early 1960s. And if you haven't read it, it's just this. It's beautiful. I'm going to keep using that word. It follows a young boy named Milo who's bored, and he gets a magic toll booth that transports him to a different world, and he goes through these worlds along with his dog named Talk. The whole thing is full of puns and wordplay, and it's got some really interesting images. There's one, for example, where he goes to this land and folks are born with their head at the level that they'll always be, and they grow down to the earth so that they never have to change their perspective. So it's just got these kind of fun, interesting things. But the most beautiful part of the book for me is when he meets a musician named Chroma, and Chroma's orchestra plays all the colors in the world. And so he watches them play the sunset. And so this is the line about this that I love. The last colors slowly faded from the western sky, and as they did, one by one, the instruments stopped until only the bass fiddles in their somber, slow movement were left to play the night, and a single set of 2 silver bells brightened the constellations. The conductor let his arms fall limply at his side and stood quite still as darkness claimed the forest. The imagery in that, every time I see a sunset and the first stars coming out, I think of that passage. I just love it. It's one of my favorite ever passages in a book.
The imagery connecting it to an orchestra of music, this symphony of nature, right?
Of colors.
That's beautiful.
It's one of my favorites. So
Theresa, I want to hear yours.
Oh boy. Well, I have so many, but I think the first one that I want to talk about is it's a collection of short stories by a Canadian author named Alistair MacLeod. And I don't know if either of you know Alistair MacLeod at all.
I don't know.
I do.
I do. Okay.
Well, you guys are librarians. I'm not surprised.
Well, I think he's like. I wish that Alistair MacLeod was celebrated in the way that I feel like he should. He's a Canadian author. He passed away, gosh, probably more than a decade ago now at this point. And he wasn't a prolific writer by any means, but what he wrote was so evocative and so wonderful. And as I understand it, his process for writing really was writing and thinking about every word on the page as he went along, which meant that it took him a very long time to write books, which is why he wasn't so prolific in his writing. So probably very different from the way that other authors might just regurgitate stuff on the page and then go back and edit. He was very, very intentional. What he wrote, what I want to talk about a bit is this collection of short stories that he wrote called Island. And he writes very much about the East Coast of Canada. And his writing is so, I would say, like deeply sad, very melancholy, evocative of a time that has kind of passed. His writing is also very haunting. and there's a strong connection to family and memory. And I would also say that what he paints of the East Coast is very much a place of wildness, of remoteness, being quite old and very deeply rooted in tradition. His writing is considered to be very lyrical and have a very strong connection to oral traditions passed along. So I wanted to read a little passage from my favorite short stories of his. And I feel very nostalgic doing this because the book that I have in hand has all of my original little tabs on it from when I did uh, a, um, a writing about this in grade 9 English at this point, eons ago. And I was so taken by his writing when I was like just 13 or 14 doing this special paper on him, and I still feel quite like haunted by him today. So the short story is called the Lost Salt Gift of Blood, and it was originally written in 1974, and it's part of this collection of short stories. And the short story, very briefly, is about a young man who comes from the big city of Toronto back to his hometown of St. John's in Newfoundland. So this is kind of the his initial coming back to St. John's. Overhead, the ivory white gulls wheel and cry, flashing also in the purity of the sun and the clean, freshly washed air. Sometimes they glide to the blue-green surface of the harbor, squawking and garbling, at times almost standing on their pink-webbed feet as if they would walk on water, flapping their wings pompously against their breasts like over-conditioned he-men who have successfully passed their bodybuilding courses. At other times, they gather in lazy groups on the rocks above the harbor's entrance, murmuring softly to themselves, or looking also quietly out toward what must be Ireland and the vastness of the sea. The harbor itself is very small and softly curving, seeming like a tiny, peaceful womb nurturing the life that now lies within it, but which originated from without, came from without and through the narrow, rock-tight channel that admits the entering and withdrawing sea. That sea is entering again now, forcing itself gently but inevitably through the tightness of the opening and laving the rocky walls and rising and rolling into the harbor's inner cove. The dories rise at their moorings and the tide laps higher on the piles and advances upwards toward the high water marks upon the land. The running moon draws tides of spring. Around the edges of the harbor, brightly colored houses dot the wet and glistening rocks. In some ways, they seem almost like defiantly optimistic horseshoe nails, yellow and scarlet and green and pink, buoyantly yet firmly permanent in the gray, unsundered rock. And to me, that is the epitome of beauty, and it takes me to St. John's. And even though at the time when I first read it, I had never been there, I felt like I was so much just by that description.
And what I'm hearing in that excerpt, what I heard from that excerpt was like specificity of words, right? Like to describe things as pompous. That's a very clear idea. I think a mark of bad writing to me is when we use kind of open-ended terms, open-ended descriptions to say that somebody is angry or sad is actually quite vague. Like you can say melancholy, infuriated. Those are much more specific words. Instead of saying ran fast, say sprinted. You save a word. It's like it's much more specific, and when you chain that level of specificity, it makes it it's more concise, but it's also just more. It's more entertaining. It's more vivid in the reader's head because ultimately what you want to do as an author is let let the reader imagine in their mind's eye what the author is trying to portray. And it's easier to do that when the language is precise and vivid, not ambiguous, like sad or angry or just beautiful.
And I think that's, the strength of his writing is more on the specificity of those kinds of descriptions. And it's less about like what really happens in the book. Like it's not about necessarily like a specific event or something. It's
Right.
more about these descriptions that he creates of people and of families and memory and history. And I especially love how he describes St. John's, like Newfoundland, as this rock that's where you could almost, see Ireland, like the motherland across from it, and you can almost feel like the two places are like touching, like their fingers are out almost touching each other,
Like reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this amazing way to describe this connection to your history and to your past and where your people came from. It's stunning, and I wish that more people read Alistair MacLeod, and this was like, something that was on when I was in high school, and for kids today that they would read, because it's such a mastery in the craft of writing, I think.
You want to be specific and deliberate because every word you choose kind of points to something and can plant different ideas in your reader's head. When directors in movies decide where to block their actors, how to shoot, like how to frame their actors, everything is intentional and deliberate for a reason. It's the same thing for authors. Every single word matters. And if I could add something to this discussion, something I find contributes to writing that feels beautiful. It's connectivity of ideas, because you can write a book of fiction and just write it like this happened and this happened and that happened, or a dialogue segment that's just he said and she said and he said and she said. At least I'm calling it connectivity of ideas because I didn't study creative literature or anything like that. But like the idea is that you have a flow where one idea builds off the one that came before it and leads into the very next one, so that it almost feels like one big idea that elaborates on the previous one constantly. It doesn't feel like you're just learning about one thing after another. There's a flow that makes it easier to follow the train of thought of the author or the character if it's a piece of fiction. And I have an excerpt that kind of illustrates this. This is from Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And just listen to how one idea kind of leads into the other. And for context, this is a book that takes place on the International Space Station, and it's a lot about astronauts philosophizing on the nature of humanity from this like perch out in zero gravity, looking down at Earth from this godlike perspective. Until then, what can we do in our abandoned solitude but gaze at ourselves, examine ourselves in endless bouts of fascinated distraction, fall in love and in hate with ourselves, make a theater, myth, and cult of ourselves? Because what else is there? To become superb in our technology, knowledge, to itch with a desire for fulfillment that we can't quite scratch, to look to the void which still isn't answering, and build spaceships anyways, and make countless circlings of our lonely planet and little excursions to our lonely moon, and think thoughts like these in weightless bafflement, in routine awe, to turn back to the earth, which gleams like a spotlit mirror in a pitch dark room, and speak into the fuzz of our radios, to the only life that appears to be there. Hello? Konnichiwa. Strast? Bonjour. Do you read me? Hello. Again, that was from Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And there's a lot of repetition and short sentences and long sentences like we mentioned earlier, but I just thought this was a great example of connectivity of ideas. What did you think of that, Karen?
I thought it was beautiful. I've not read that book, so thank you for sharing it. I really love the last stanza where they were calling out hello in all of the different languages, and how that sort of ties back into the overall goal of seeing the world as a whole.
Humanity as one,
Yes,
right? It doesn't
yeah,
matter what language you speak, right?
exactly. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have another point about what makes writing beautiful, Karen, going back around the table?
So for me, it might be sort of age and stage, but one of the other things that I find beautiful is that if an author shares a piece of wisdom, like within the character or the structure of the novel, that makes me sort of stop and reevaluate my own thinking on things. And so one of the books that I read, I think it was 2 summers ago now, was Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it was it is a
It
beautiful
is.
book, beautifully written. It's quite, I don't know how to describe it. It's quite soft. There's not rough edges to the book. You sort of sink into it, or at least I kind of sank into it. It's about a woman and her family. They own a cherry farm, and they're all together because of COVID. And so it's just a little bit about daily life, but through the daily life, the mother, she tells her story of her youth and her early career as an actress to her daughters. And she tells that story with the benefit of the perspective of being a woman who's now in her 50s. And I loved it. So a couple of the quotes that came out of that I actually wrote down, because I just love them so much. Here's one of my favorites. There's no explaining this simple truth about life. You will forget much of it. The painful things you were certain you'd never be able to let go, now you're not entirely sure they happened. While the thrilling parts, the heart-stopping joys, splintered and scattered and became something else. Memories are then replaced by different joys and larger sorrows, and unbelievably, those things get knocked aside as well, until one morning you're picking cherries with your 3 grown daughters, and your husband goes by on the gator, and you are positive that this is all you ever wanted in the world. And what I love about that is that it's sort of, there's bits that are profound in that, and then it's all kind of anchored in her current day, very unexciting life about her daughters and her husband and the world that they are inhabiting. And it's true, things that I thought I never would forget, I cannot recall now. And so it was just one of those pieces of truth that was delivered in a way that really, really struck me. And here's another one that she wrote. We clump together in our sorrow. In joy, we may wander off in our separate directions, but in sorrow, we prefer to hold hands. And there's just something about the way that she brings those ideas out simply, but beautifully. I loved the whole book, and I loved the way that she was writing.
It's cool because both those quotes that you just read out, they come off like epiphanies from the perspective of a character in a work of fiction, but they double as just very sage observations that apply to everyone. It's true that in life we very much live in the present, and what we want now is not what we wanted in the past, and we don't know what we're going to want or need in the future. And you forget most of what life brought you, but it still made you nonetheless. And if that idea needed to be brought to you through the medium of fiction, then I think that just shows the power of fiction and beautiful writing, doesn't it?
It does. And it in the context of the story where she's reflecting back on her life, and what she remembers and what she doesn't, and what she tells and what she doesn't, I just thought it was just a beautiful sort of placement of that idea in that book.
Theresa, as we wrap up, it's going back to you. We're on the table. You're next.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a bit about Tim O'Brien. He's an author who wrote about his experiences in the Vietnam War, and his work is something that I came across during my university studies.
And he wrote a number of books, but he also wrote a series of short stories called The Things They Carried. And there was one in particular there called Sweetheart of the Song Trebong that has haunted me for my entire life since I first read it. And it's about a young woman who is very much positioned as this beautiful, kind of Midwestern, unaffected type, the kind of person who, wants to get married and have kids and lives in the picket fence house. And her boyfriend is stationed in Vietnam, in a remote part of Vietnam during the war. And he somehow manages to bring her over. And when she first comes, she is depicted as wearing this very beautiful, like, sweater, pink sweater, I think, and like cutoffs, and there's very strong imagery around like her innocence. And
Hmm.
as the story progresses, she really becomes at one with Vietnam, with the land, with what they're doing in Vietnam, um, and really changes, finds something within herself. So I wanted to read the last bit of the short story to you, and I think in the way that Alistair MacLeod kind of evoked this sense of like place and imagery, Sweetheart of the Stone Trebong really challenges this notion of what women are supposed to be. What happened to her, Rat said, was what happened to all of them. You come over clean, you get dirty, and then afterward, it's never the same. A question of degree. Some make it intact, some don't make it at all. For Mary Ann Bell, it seemed Vietnam had the effect of a powerful drug, that mix of unnamed terror and unnamed pleasure that comes as the needle slips in, and you know you're risking something. The endorphins start to flow, and the adrenaline, and you hold your breath and creep quietly through the moonlight nightscapes. You become intimate with danger. You're in touch with the far side of yourself, as though it's another hemisphere, and you want to string it out and go wherever the trip takes you and be host to all the possibilities inside yourself. Not bad, she said. Vietnam made her glow in the dark. She wanted
Hmm.
more. She wanted to penetrate deeper into the mystery of herself. And after a time, the wanting became needing, which turned then to craving. So I think that the story, for me, really is very much positioned in a very particular time and place in American history. And there was a lot going on at the time during the Vietnam War. Though he wrote this several decades later, really comes from this place of a lot of change and upheaval. And I think feminism was really central to this as well. And he also has this interesting um, take or question around how stories are told and who tells them and how accurate they are and whether accuracy really matters. So he brings forth a lot of questions, not just about the role of women, but I also think that line that you might have within yourself between humanity or what your expectations are of yourself, especially as a woman, and what you really feel in yourself, and this wildness, I think, within yourself as well. And it's very interesting, and it's very evocative, and just really
Right.
makes me think a lot.
And it was evocative to compare Vietnam, the sense, the feeling around the Vietnam War to taking drugs, the needling of it. Tasteful use of metaphor and analogy like that can be very powerful when it's well done. So very beautifully.
Yeah, that line of as the needle slips in is
Yes.
just holy smokes.
Yeah, that's the
It's
line that stuck
something.
with me too, I have to say.
Yeah.
It
And
was
you have to read I'm not doing justice to this by any means, but it's really worth it to go and read this collection of stories. And
what's the name of the collection for everyone?
The things they carried. So it's this literal and metaphorical collection of stories about. It's a collection of stories, literal and metaphorical things that these soldiers carried. So actual physical things that he talks about, but also these other things of like home and the absurdity of the war, and the weightiness of it all.
Beautifully said. Karen, Theresa, I think I have to leave it at there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That was Karen McKay and Theresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access. We were talking about beautiful writing and what makes it beautiful. It's not an easy question to answer. You just kind of know it when you see it sometimes. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audio Book Review. The show airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours. You can also find it as a podcast, and that includes our YouTube channel. Just look up AMI Audio Book Review. You can email us at audiobookreview@ami.ca. We'd love to hear your feedback and your comments. You can also follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Shamansky. Happy listening.